Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. I'm Eve Engler, coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. Canadian Foreign Policy Hour is a critical look at Canada's role abroad, every Monday night, 6 p.m. Eastern. Um, I'll get right to it. The initiative, the UN Net Zero Banking Alliance that Mark Carney is a big player in, four of the Canadian banks, I believe, withdrew from that in the last few days. Uh, in part, it seems like because of Trump. Obviously, they were never committed to that because they're committed to profits, and however they can make those profits is what the banks are committed to. But it's a little bit of a blow. I wouldn't put too much stock in the initiative, but it is a little bit of a blow to fighting the climate crisis. The Financial Post this week had a piece that oil sands output poised to climb 6% this year. I think I mentioned variation of that last week, but this is another analysis saying that there's going to be this huge increase no matter what happens in LA, no matter what happens in forest fires or climate disturbances in different places. Jasper, Lytton, the tar sands production keeps going up. There's a story about Cuba asking Canada for debt relief for a debt that goes back to like the mid 1970s. Basically, the situation is so difficult in Cuba that they are made this request of the Canadian government. Don't know where that's going to go. The Globe and Mail had a front page piece. It was quite a good piece, interesting piece on Haiti. Haiti's economic elite looms large in country's history of strife. And it goes through the sort of 10 or so, a bit more than that, maybe, light-skinned families that kind of dominate the economy in Haiti. And that's rare to talk about how there's basically a, racial apartheid, if you like, within Haiti in terms of the extreme class divide. Most of the families that own the economy are of Middle Eastern background. There is still some sort of what we call the traditional so-called mulatto that goes back obviously to the slave plantation system, but it's basically from a Haitian perspective, they're all kind of light skinned. They look more like me than they do to than most Haitians. And the story starts off, doesn't go much into Canada's ties to these elite families, and it ends off on a sort of positive note that they recognize that they have done things wrong in the past, and now they are going to turn things around. The younger generation of these oligarchs are more forward thinking than their parents, is how the story ends off with. But it starts off with Nadeeb, who was sanctioned by Canada. A whole bunch of these have been sanctioned by the Canadian government a couple of years ago, began that process. I'm not sure that means that much because, as the story starts off with, the Canadian embassy coordinates with Deeb to use his. He has a house on the top of Pétionville, which is the mountain of Port-au-Prince, um, and they used to, because of the sort of gangs controlling the highways, the way to get people out is through these helicopters, and the Canadian embassy uses his property, even though he's sanctioned by Canada, and they clearly have a decent relationship to him still. Uh, and that the story sort of starts off with that, and then kind of ignores Canada's role. And if you look at like the APED, right? Andre APED was the probably the best example, but Andre APED was a subcontractor for Gildan, the Gildan Montreal, apparel company, and Andre Ped was the head of the group of 184 that overthrew Aristide, the so-called 184 civil society groups that campaigned to oust Aristide in 2004. The story does it talks a bit about how these families finance the gangs and how they finance the gangs. It talks about that report. that horrific report back in late 2004 from the University of Miami human rights Thomas Griffin, and they funded the gang. They back then they funded one of the gangs in Cité du Soleil to try to destabilize Aristide. And the story kind of implies, and I think my guess is correctly, that the gang, these rich families' funding of the gangs in Haiti is sort of like it took on a life of its own. It's not necessarily good for them anymore. They did do it for their own political reasons, very clearly to undercut the mobilization against Jovenel Moise and obviously the PHTK and Michel Martelly were fun, were had these alliances with gangs for political reasons. So that I think is all correct. I'm not sure that I think things have just sort of spiraled out of control, and the gangs basically got stronger and stronger. The state got weaker and weaker, and now things have kind of, no one's in control. Um, there may still be the rich people may still be more directly involved in that process of propping up, and they clearly are in sort of indirect ways and ports and stuff like that. Allowing guns into the country and stuff like that. But anyways, interesting story. I don't know if I've ever seen. I don't think I've ever seen a Canadian media outlet do sort of a deep dive. And it's a big piece. It's like 5,000, I think at least maybe 10,000 words. A deep dive into the sort of racial dynamics of the Haitian elite, and also just framing them in this sort of quite a negative light. The Apparently, since the start of the year now, the UN says 230,000 people have been displaced in Congo, in the east of the country. And I bring up this Congo, of course, and the one of the worst uh, tragedies taking place, wars taking place in the world, because Canada has given so much support to Paul Kagame over the years. And so Canada and the US, I think, very quickly could if they acted, if they cared, they could go a long way in ending the Rwandan-backed destabilization, which seems to be gathering pace in Eastern Congo. Their Globe published this big long piece from Jeffrey York, the South Africa correspondent, this week about a Namibian town where this Canadian company Dundee Precious Resources, Precious, something like that, that they left 300,000 tons of arsenic waste, and that there's huge issue with sickness in this town, and studies show that arsenic in the soil, in the plants, and in the people. And it's a big long story. It goes all these details, very horrible story of just mining companies, indifference to local population, indifference to local ecology, etc., and just basically suck the resources out and bye bye. Um, and But in this story, it points out that the smelter is considered the is part of this export processing zone. So it drastically reduces the taxes paid to the government. So I don't know. I didn't get into more of the background, and export processing zones, how that's traditionally conceived is usually sort of like these apparel companies, in Honduras, where they're making shirts or whatever for the North American market. And so they get these sort of special rights because everything's kind of exported and whatever. You don't think of like mineral extraction and or mineral processing in the same kind of way. But apparently, Namibia, some Namibian government agreed to basically bypass the normal rules and normal taxes for this smeltering process. Barrick Gold in Mali, the government there seized. They got a court order, I guess, back in December, and then they seized $245 million in gold from Barrick. And in response, Barrick suspended its operations. So this is a big escalation in this dispute between the authorities in Mali and Barrick. They're really trying to get a greater part of the resources to the country. The Financial Times had this big piece, pretty long piece about what's taking place in the Sahel countries on mining, Mali in the lead, and how this is, sort of first they kick out the foreign troops, and now they're squeezing more out of these foreign, heavily Canadian resource companies, and this seems like a positive development to me. Obviously, there's questions about how to do this in a way that's most beneficial to the people, and sometimes the companies do have power, right? So they can make your life difficult, but and obviously they have access to foreign governments that can destabilize and all that kind of stuff as well. But big picture, obviously, local populations getting greater share of the resources is a good thing, and kicking out the foreign soldiers is obviously a good thing. We'll see. Barrick's obviously taken Mali to international tribunal. That will play out over many years. But this is definitely an issue I want to learn more about and see more kind of deep discussion about what's actually happening in Mali, Burkina Faso, and and um, um, Niger, with these sort of nationalist military governments. The whole process of Canada bringing in greater restrictions on Chinese investors and Chinese kind of ties to Canadian companies for so-called strategic minerals. So there's this, I didn't able to read it because it was in paywall, but one of the mining journals had a story about Lithium Argentina, which of course, if a company is named Lithium Argentina, almost for sure it's based in Canada. If it's named Uganda Minerals, it's almost for sure based in Canada. If it's named Western Africa Minerals, it's almost for sure. I've written about this, particularly about the Africa context, many times. Like a whole list of all these different African named companies that are actually based in Canada. Nonetheless, Lithium Argentina investors okay Canada exit. So they're moving to Switzerland because they want to maintain this Chinese investment in the company. So they re-domicile it to Switzerland to maintain this Chinese investment. This is a hot button issue. I've talked about it many times. Big issue in the business pages of the Globe and National Post. The mining industry is very angry for these greater restrictions on their ability to sell to China and to have Chinese companies and capitalists invest in their firms. And this is all being pushed by Washington and its sort of competition with China. The front, I think it was the Globe business section, was Natural Resources Minister pitches joint Canada-US investment in Tech's germanium operations. Germanium is some mineral that the Chinese apparently have much of or most of the current stock or whatever, and it's, I guess, used in some new technologies. And my understanding is the Chinese recently put some restrictions on the export to the US as a retaliation against some of the measures the US has been imposing on Chinese companies and whatnot. So this germanium is kind of got tied into a trade war between the US and China, and so the Canadian government wants to basically fund this. U.S. and Canada fund this Canadian company to extract that mineral. Also, there's the headline in I think it was the Financial Post. G7 talks sought on metal pricing to counter China's sway, and so the Canadian government is trying to convince the G7 to agree to sort of some sort of price floor on a number of minerals because I guess the Chinese are able to extract these minerals at a lower price, and so a bunch of Canadian companies are facing a tough go of it because the costs for them to extract these minerals are higher. And so the Canadian government's trying to make some agreement with the G7 to have a price floor on different minerals as a sort of part of this whole competition with China over strategic minerals. On the China file, the Journal de Montréal had this piece um, about the Quebec pension plan, the Caisse de dépôt, having $350 million in Tencent, which is a Chinese company, a Chinese Disney company. I guess it's sort of a media type company. And they're making a big, oh, scary that our investment, the Quebec pension fund has investments in this Chinese company. Um, they don't really get into much. Uh, just one second. The television. Sorry. And so yeah, it's the whole Chinese boogeyman, and we have to. It's fascinating to see how much the Journal de the French media has very much gotten full throttle in this delinking from China kind of dynamic. The 21 Electronic Warfare Regiment, which is this high tech a Canadian regiment in the military. Their new facility is being the ground is broken on it. $98 million facility. This is they do all kinds of fancy kind of tech kind of warfare stuff. It's quite secretive. But another, huge investment in upgrading the military. The Ottawa Citizen has a piece today. Um, Sorry, I'm getting lots of questions from my 7-year-old. David Puglisi is an article about want to see a copy of a speech by Canada's top general, then you have to pay. And so basically, Puglisi tried to get a speech by Wayne Ear, the former chief of the defense staff, last year, and that he gave to some conference, and they refused to give him the speech. And they said you had to basically ask for it from access to information. Apparently, traditionally, the military did offer the speech, but they're now they're saying no, we don't give the speech because that would undermine the conference that he spoke at. So some people paid to go to the conference, and therefore if we give the speech out the next day, that would somehow undermine the conference. It's totally ridiculous, but it just speaks to how kind of tight with information the military is. And Puglisi has obviously documented this for many, many, many years, decades, and it's a total scandal that how the Canadian military will just arbitrarily control information and ignore access to information rules. And the only reason they finally intervened, they were actually refusing to give him the speech, but the information commissioner started prodding. Why aren't you giving the speech? And so then they finally caved. Um, there's an interesting column by Jack Granstein, who of course is the one of the maybe the preeminent kind of military propagandist, academic military propagandist over the past 40 or 50 years. And it's time for Polyev to speak up for Canada's defense. And so Granstein would definitely be a conservative supporter. but he's starting to get angry that Polyev is not committing to the 2% GDP. That he stayed very kind of cautious on any question of dollars to the military, which is interesting because I think Polyev knows that there's it's very, very difficult financially speaking for the government to get to 2% GDP without some tax increase or and that he also knows that the public is pretty they'll sort of say they support the military and they'll say, oh yeah, there's an underinvestment in the military. But when it comes down to it, most people don't really prioritize military spending. So Poilievre's being cautious on that, and he's mostly got a pass from all these sort of right-wing anti-Trudeau media because they just want to get rid of Trudeau, and so they're supporting Poilievre. But somebody who's a bit more, I would say, ideological and is pro-military, someone like Granstein, who takes this stuff very seriously, he's, I guess, starting to get angry with Poilievre. So we'll see where that goes. The Globe today has a piece about the Ukrainians wanting an end, and so it starts off with cut off the guy's name. Sas joined the Ukrainian army 5 days after the Russian attacked in February 2022, intending to fight for as long as it took to drive the invaders out of his country. Almost 3 years later, the builder turned artillery specialist hopes that Donald Trump means what he says about bringing the war to a quick end. So apparently, there's factions of the Ukrainian military that's hoping that Donald Trump is going to basically force the Ukrainian government. I mean, it doesn't say exactly this, but force the Ukrainian government to come to some sort of negotiated end to this horrible war. And what it really drives home to me, seeing this stuff, is that like all these things that Biden's been doing a whole series of things, the G7, that with the Russian assets, Canada's right in the middle of that, that are kind of boxing the war in, right? They obviously Zelensky's calling for these things, but in practice, what's happening here is they're just trying to box Trump specifically into this war, and it's just boxing Ukrainians, of course. I mean, it's just, it's not a new idea here, but you just sort of see it play out in this latest phase where it's just making getting out of this horrible war that much more difficult. You take these Russian assets, give them to Ukraine. That was part of what was going to be, a negotiation was going to be, well, we'll give you your assets back if you end the war, or whatever. That was. And so same thing with sanctions, all this kind of stuff. And they're just going further and further with this stuff, making the unraveling of it that much more difficult. And it really obvious, what's happening, who's really being hit by this is this guy who, was patriotic fervor 5 days into the war, quits his job, joins the military, and now he just wants this, some change in direction by Donald Trump to because he doesn't see an end to it, and Ukraine's losing more and more. There's no one's winning from this, except the National Post had a piece from the guy who was working with CSIS and the Ukrainian, Zivo, I think is Adam Zivo's piece. Um, Gas shut off could be win for Canada. And so the Ukrainians cut off the natural gas that was flowing still until January 1st, as per longstanding agreement, through its territory to Hungary, Slovakia, I think some to Moldova, and they ended that, and they were getting like $1 billion a year from that agreement, and I think the Russians were making 5 or 6 billion a year from it, and so basically what Zivo's saying is that this now could be really good for Canada. So basically, Russian gas is almost zero, is making itself to Central or Western Europe, or 0% of Central Western Europeans' gas comes from Russia now, drastically down from 3 years ago. And so Canada LNG exports, U.S. has already been benefiting. I think Norway is the big beneficiary. So I think some from Qatar, but this is basically he's arguing this is going to be this could be very good for Canada. Uh, Melanie Jolie, I won't get into too much on this, but she goes, she's in the US, she's in Washington. She meets with Lindsey Graham and John Thune, who I'm not sure who he's the leader of. I think he's the House leader, Congress. I'm not sure. Um, Anyways, she top US lawmaker, and she says when Canada and the US work together, we are the strongest team in the world. And some other things about this great relationship. And I think when you read that, my first reaction is like, how does that? I mean, it's in one sense it would be true, but how does that? How does a Haitian hear that? Like it would be true from a Haitian perspective. Yes, they are a strong team. They can get together and they can, destroy our democracy and they can overthrow our government. Um, but you hear that comment from lots of places in the world, how does like what is that reaction? Now, it's portrayed, sort of like this positively in the Canadian. Obviously, Jolie is making the statement on X, and she doesn't believe that there'll be any political cost or very minimum political cost for doing that. But it's always, I think, important to try to how does that what does that say? It's also, I think, quite embarrassing. Lindsey Graham, a month ago or 2 months ago, whenever it was, when the ICC came out with their few arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant, he said we would destroy your economy if you uphold it. He said, and he named Canada, Britain, maybe France. I forget what other countries I think Canada was the first country he named. If you were to uphold the ICC, we will destroy your economy, was what Graham said. No reaction from any Canadian, from my understanding, there was no reaction from any Canadian politician, certainly not the government. I don't even think the NDP responded. But here you have Jolie not long after, uh, just sort of hobnobbing with Graham. We're so great together, all that kind of stuff. The On the ceasefire question, which is good. I mean, it's good. Like it's just to see the joy in Gaza, to see the trucks of food and goods coming in over just in the last 24 hours. The Palestinians released Khalid Gerard, the PFLP lawmaker who I did stuff with years ago, 10 years ago, or both of her daughters. Um, were at university in Canada, did events with them. They were prominent activists in Ottawa and it was Peterborough. And so her being and she was clearly like put in solitary confinement. I don't know if people saw the images of her. She came out with her just gone like completely gray. Clearly, horrible, horrible conditions that being left in. So the ceasefire is very good. It's now there's lots of elements though that to kind of unpackage and where this is going to go. And it's fascinating that it's Trump. It's clearly Trump's person that put the pressure on Netanyahu to do this. It's not clear if it's just Trump wanted this for his inauguration or if it's part of some other agreement to normalize with Saudi Arabia, or if there's something else going on, and Trump does want to play this sort of anti-warish kind of thing. It's not clear if the pressure will continue after stage one. Stage one will probably hold, is my guess here, over the next 6 weeks. Now, you look at well, one thing, Smoldrich, the minister, I got this quote from antiwar.com article, which was from an Israeli outlet, and it quotes. So Smoldrich said that he was given assurances from Netanyahu that Israel would restart military operations to launch a quote gradual takeover of the entire Gaza Strip. He said Gaza was quote ruined and disintegrated, uninhabitable. That's on the quotes. And then he goes on, quote, and it won't stay that way. Okay, then this is a quote from Smolders. Don't be impressed by the forced joy of our enemy. This is an animalistic society that sanctifies death. Very soon we will erase their smile again and replace it with cries of grief and the wails of those who were left with nothing. End quote from Smolders. Okay. Now, like that's bananas that a minister in a government is saying that. I mean, that's insane. Okay, now insane in the sense of like the nastiness and the openly like genocidal or racist or whatever you want to exactly define that as. But the other part is just the obvious like contradiction within his statement. He's like saying these are the animalistic society that sanctifies death. So he says that once at one point, and then the next line he's like, "We're going to destroy all of them, and they're going to be crying like they were crying a few days ago. Like basically, we're the ones that the animalistic society that's impose or sanctify death, if you like." Just totally stunning kind of stuff to read. But this is Israel, man. This is a country that is, and you see that with. I'll get to that maybe in a second. Start with Trudeau. So Trudeau's statement. He posts yesterday. Joyful, great. We're seeing hostages released. It's all about the three Israelis. Nothing about again like this elected lawmaker Khalida Jahar that has a Canadian connection too. I don't think she has a passport, but I think her daughters may have Canadian passports. Um, but so and nothing about her being released and all these others who've just been detained. No reason, right? It's really just detaining people for political activity, whatever, right? And and so it's just like totally one-sided Trudeau statement there. Just like his statement when the ceasefire came out, and as CJPME pointed out, in Trudeau's statement, Hamas is directly condemned for killing Israelis, while the mass slaughter and starvation of civilians in Gaza is unattributed and simply mourned. Right. So just even today, now 16 months into all this horror, just even at the rhetorical level, Trudeau is still totally the taking the Israeli angle on all this, and to this point of the like um, monstrous nature of Israeli public opinion or political world, and very far into public opinion. Um, the CJA statement about the captives is the same dynamic, right? So they put out a statement, same thing. It's like the only thing that matters is the as they put it, the 469 days seized with the fate of the hostages taken by Hamas. Today or early, okay, goes into it, and Tyler Levitin, the former IJV, I don't know, was director or whatever the official position, head activist at IJV a handful of years ago, he responds today. Or yesterday, he says, it's incredible how transparent CJ is in their proud ethno supremacy. They express no relief whatsoever for the end of the daily massacres and mass starvation of Palestinian civilians amounting to genocide, according to world's leading genocide experts and human rights orgs. Monsters. And it really is true. I mean, it's monstrous. Just like totally, ethno supremacist, right? Just completely Palestinians are just not human beings. They don't count. They don't matter. It's wild to see it. I was reading a Canadian Jewish News article today about this, about the sort of differing opinions on the ceasefire and this kind of thing. And the undertone of it here is basically a lot of Israelis are angry about this. They don't want this. And they basically, which not Israeli, Canadian Jews, should I say, in this Canadian Jewish News article, they don't want this. They want more killing, and you see that online, right? There's all this like the hard Zionists is like they're just so like bloodthirsty. They say it's all about the hostages, but they make it really clear it ain't about any of the hostages. Right? They're more than happy to see whatever Israelis are in Gaza be killed if they can kill 10,000, 50,000, however many more Palestinians, if they, if that can be used to justify it. That's really clear. But so the Canadian Jewish News piece today says, quotes this guy Greenstein, thanks the Universe Daily, quote, for making me a Jew in this time, because this is when it counts. This is when it matters to be Jewish. This is how we should show we have to transcend words. I wake up at night thinking about hostages. I wake up in the morning thinking about Israel. Every day, he said, you walk by people with keffiyehs. I mean, your head explodes. You just read this stuff and you just say, like, what in the world? This is the Canadian Jewish News not really not trying to make this person look bad, right? They're coming from a very Zionist perspective, and this is the people like there's some segment, I don't know what it is. Is it 10%? Is it 40% of the Canadian Jewish community who, like, as this guy puts it, he wakes up in the middle of the night thinking of the hostages, not the 10,000 Palestinian hostages. Wakes up in the morning, think of Israel, and and when he passes somebody in the street that has a keffiyeh, he wants his head to, head explode. It's just totally bananas kind of ideology that Zionism has clearly gripped. The guy goes on. There's a bunch more of what the guy says is totally fanatical about the tribe and stuff that I won't continue on that because I don't got that much time. Um, the financial or the National Post this week has this story titled "Toronto Lawyer World's Biggest Theodore Herzl Fan." And so this guy, this Toronto Matt Law, I didn't get his first name down here, but is this lawyer at some prominent Toronto law firm, and apparently he's like has the biggest Theodore Herzl, who've considered the founder of Jewish Zionism. This Christian Zionism exists for a couple of centuries before Herzl's movement, but obviously considered the founder of Jewish Zionism. Herzl, and it's this big long story. He's got all these things. And he tours it. He brings it down, museum this, and he goes to the U.S. and goes wherever international, showing all his Herzl stuff. And talks about Mertz, quotes this guy saying that how he was very progressive and he has very expansivism. He says, according to Herzl, everyone was equal. I mean, Herzl was a raging late 1800s imperialist racist. I mean, the notion that everyone was equal in Herzl's thinking is like, I mean, this guy has to know. I mean, I presume he's read Herzl's writing. He would have to know that Herzl was this incredible racist. But for him, everyone was equal because apparently, uh, I don't even think I think Herzl was actually very racist against European Jews, and he was actually quite anti-Semitic as well. But according to this guy's definition, Herzl was believed everyone was equal. The Canadian Jewish News has a piece about mandatory Holocaust. The calls are getting louder for mandatory Holocaust education in the province of Quebec. The Federation CJA, Combined Jewish Appeal, gave $50,000 to Montreal's English School Board for museum visits and teacher training for Holocaust stuff. I think I've been over this. Won't get into it in any detail, but the Nazi Holocaust and the whole industry, and they go into all these stories of teachers who they can get. If teachers teach the Nazi Holocaust, there's all these projects they can get these funding to go on these trips and this and that. There's this whole network of Finkelstein detailed it out 25 years ago in the Holocaust industry, and it's much more elaborate today. And a big part of it, and the story kind of hints at it but doesn't state it. When they quote the Montreal English School Board person saying it's more important than ever, what they're obviously saying is that, without saying it directly, is that the criticism of Israel has led to anti-Semitism, and so we need Holocaust education to grade sixes to make sure that they, are very sensitive to that issue. That's not being stated explicitly. I mean, some people they do actually state that explicitly, but that's underpins it. And as crazy as it is, considering how horrific the Nazi crimes were to European Jewry, in 2025, it is simply not progressive to. It's not. It's not universalist. It's not anti-racist. to impose mandatory Holocaust education in school system. Um, there was a I think I'm going to leave that. Okay, so there's a story in the Vancouver, the Mainlander, I think it's called. I think it's a Vancouver focused outlet. Quite a good story. Palestinian symbols banned at Vancouver Public Library. And sometime this summer, the public library imposed a policy that employees could not wear the keffiyeh unless they could not just speak Arabic, if they could speak a Palestinian dialect of Arabic. So any random Arab-speaking Vancouver Public Library employee couldn't wear the keffiyeh, and certainly non-Arabic speaking. And this goes the story goes into the why, and there's people who claim that it was threatening. They claim that other public library employees thought it was threatening, and then they get into how there's these big foundations that are led by these Zionist donors that have been funding more and more projects to the public library, and then the city council, the new mayor is right wing, very Zionist. This guy Sim. Uh, so. But it's quite a good story, quite an interesting story that goes through that question. I was at Concordia this week, and I picked up a copy of the Link and the Concordia, and I don't actually remember which one of the two it was in, but this is a story, fascinating story. I had heard a little bits about this, but it had much more detail. Concordia hires external security firm founded by ex-Israeli soldier, and apparently the university spent 30,000 bucks on this firm called Perceptage International. And it was set up by a former IDF soldier, Adam Cohen, back in 2008. This guy, Adam Cohen, is the National Director of Community Security for CIJA and Director of Community Security for Federation CJA here in Montreal. Apparently, this firm has hired IDF soldiers, and it once had that on its website, but then it took it down when it became controversial. And so they quote the spokesperson for Concordia on this issue, and and so what's happened basically so over the fall semester after the protest, the encampments, though there wasn't one at Concordia, but they basically this whole security of campus. I go to McGill, or I go to Concordia Metro a couple of days ago when I was there, and there's a security guard in the metro because the Concordia is underground. You can go like stay underground and go to the university, and but the metro, of course, would be public. I don't know where this guy was standing. I would have thought that was still the public area, not the Concordia area. But right when you get out of the metro, at the Concordia stop, there's a security guard there, and there's all these stories about there's just security all over the campus, and it's just heightened even from my time 20 some odd years ago when there was already it seemed like a lot of security. And so they bring in this firm. Now, the question of why they would hire, they would have to understand the optics of hiring a security firm that is set up by the head of security for CIJA and Federation Combined Jewish Appeal. I can't imagine Concordia didn't understand the optics of that. Now, my presumption here is they hired this firm very specifically for the optics because this is a message to Jewish Zionist donors to the Concordia, which have been important part of the donor class to Concordia, that we're going to hire one of your firms, if you like, to have security. So it was meant. The message was meant to be sent in that way. Now, but the Concordia spokesperson in the student paper, their response I think is totally hilarious. Julie Fortier claimed all perceptive agents hired by university are Canadian Armed Forces veterans, not IDF. She's like, don't worry here. We're not hiring former IDF soldiers. They're just Canadian soldiers we're hiring. And you're like, what in the? They're like openly saying we're like hiring former Canadian soldiers to like provide security on campus to explicitly to like oversee student demonstrations. Anyways, that's the to see some of this stuff play out and the is fascinating. The sort of authoritarian fascistic tendencies that have come out amidst response to the protests. Now, on that note, Ben Mulroney, the always fascinating Ben Mulroney, on I guess he has a show on 640 News in Toronto. I think it's in Toronto. Maybe it's in Montreal as well. I don't know. Um, and maybe it's national actually. He someone calls in and starts saying, I guess I don't know what the show was all about, but I actually listened to the 2 minute clip on Twitter, and says that people have the right to protest against genocide. And so Mulroney goes on his rant and says they have no right to you have no right to protest in Canada. He says that's Ben Mulroney saying this. Uh, and then he says, which is obviously insane to say, and then he says that referring to genocide is flat earthery. He hangs up on the collar and goes on this whole rant, but you're not going to come to my show and refer to genocide, and that's like you're not going to come to my show and do flat earther, flat the say the Earth's flat, and every single amnesty, all the UNHCR, all the different ICJ says plausible. It's an endless stream of experts, genocide experts say it's a genocide. But according to Ben Maloney, it's flat Earth. That's the Canadian media. Now, another example, the Canadian media still today. So CBC, the CBC News World, Natasha, um, is it Natasha Farah? Is that her name? Um, CBC News World. Her father is that real is a Pakistani background, but he was basically a serious hard right winger, anti-Muslim guy. I think it's Natasha Farrar, something like that. Um, she stops. I watched this clip as well. There's this Palestinian who I guess just before had used the word genocide. And she stops and she says, we cannot use that word. She goes, sorry, we cannot use the word. Very nice tone. It's crazy. Speaking to a Palestinian, saying, you cannot use the word genocide to describe Israel's actions in Gaza. And then because she says the International Criminal Court, mistaken for the ICJ, is dealing with the allegation. So you can't use the word genocide on CBC because the ICJ ruling is not going to happen. The final ruling won't happen for 10, 5, 10 years, realistically. Even though they said it's a plausible genocide, even though a whole host of other, genocide experts, Amnesty, whatever, but CBC is still at the point we're going to stop guests you have come on and basically berate them for using the word genocide. Now, it's one thing if CBC itself doesn't want to use that word, but to basically berate a Palestinian who comes on and uses that word, fascinating, crazy stuff. Here we are 16 months later. Um, there's another example of media thing, and just the Canadian media spirit. So this guy, Wojtek Zemberg, he says in response to, I think it's in response to Tyler, it was in response to Tyler Leviton's, I think it might be in his tweet. He says, this guy was a former senior producer for The Agenda on TVO. And he says, when they start acting like human beings, they will be treated accordingly. Oh yeah, Leviton is responding to So that the thing I stated earlier of CIJA basically just wiping out Palestinians, and Leviton saying that they're monsters for doing that. This guy's responding to Leviton and basically saying Palestinians aren't human beings. If they start acting like human beings, then CIJA will start treating them like human beings. And again, this guy was until last year apparently he was a senior producer at TVO's Agenda. Now, in a little less like over the top, but nonetheless outrageous media bias this week, I noticed, was in the Globe. Okay, so the Globe's coverage of the ceasefire, I think it's Thursday or Friday's story, and it's just like totally remarkable to see how the scale, first of all, it starts off with Israelis and how horrible this has all been. And then it comes down to it's like I have like one, it's quoting Canadian with connections to Israel. I don't know if she's Canadian Israeli or just Canadian with connections to Israel. And she's like, I got a cousin who I think is detained, captive of in Gaza, and just an emotional turmoil, whatever. So like that starts it all off, and then they quote that doctor is Eldin Abulesh, who from Gaza, who's now a Canadian prominent doctor, who says more than 70 relatives, young nieces and nephews killed. Okay, so the Israeli that's like, the Jewish Canadian who's got a connection to Israel, who's got one family member that's detained, and then 70 killed, and they start with the one detained, the 70 killed comes after, and it's all much more emotional about the Israeli side. Just fascinating to see that play out amidst the level of destruction in Gaza. Now, on a more positive note, there was a really impressive action at the Globe Mail building was occupied this week by activists in Toronto, and they listed out all the names of journalists who have been killed, and it looked like a very good. Obviously, the media didn't report on it, but it looked like quite an impressive action that was widely covered, at least on X, I think probably on other social media. And some of the stuff that came up as part of this about what the Globe editorial from October 10th that says we need to support everything Israel does, just a totally crazy editorial amidst it was already clear what Israel was starting to do and planning on doing. Um, Also this week, Melissa Latzman spoke in Hamilton. Seemed like it was very good action. They really made that a controversial event. Obviously, the Blinken thing in the States that was quite good with that Sam Husseini and Max Blumenthal. Not a Canadian example, but nonetheless a pretty fun to watch challenge of Blinken as he left. There reports of pretty big demo, at least in Toronto, in response to the ceasefire. Apparently, thousands of people marched. Uh, um, uh, Now, the direct action at Chrystia Freeland's launch yesterday was really good. I mean, I didn't see, I wasn't there, so I just saw reports, but what I saw, from what I could tell, they really pulled this one off well. And it seems like it was at least a dozen people, and they got inside. It was, I guess, fairly easy to get in, decent number of people in there, but not huge number of people. They did the one by one, the prolonging, right? So if you just all start yelling at the same time, you might be louder for the moment, but it's you kind of can end it fairly quickly. And they just did one by one each time Christopher Freeland started speaking and got quiet, people listening, another person starts yelling. They got a Palestinian flag onto the podium. Another person got on the podium. They got a really good shot of a banner. Right, they got it right behind Freeland. Even you see, there's a shot of Freeland looking behind to look at the banner to see, I guess, what it says. As some of the people trying to push these people out. Apparently, they banged on the door after they were all kicked out, and they kind of kept their sort of presence felt. They got a press release out to, I don't know, like obviously they wrote it beforehand. I don't know if they were handing it out to media on the spot or they just sent it out, but I think somebody was probably handing it out to media on the spot. Very good move. And it just totally derailed her launch. Obviously, this was a really high profile event in Toronto, tons of media there. And they got genocide Gaza. They got arms embargo. I saw reports mentioning arms embargo. Freeland had refused to meet with constituents. That all got across in different coverage, and obviously it also was a big blow to Freeland. It was a disaster for her, and she is, she had Anthony Housefather right at the front. There's like 4 or 5 people you can see right behind her. Housefather's right there. So she's positioning herself as pro-Israel, whatever. Now, she probably wants Housefather, and Israel becomes a bit sensitive for her because her Nazi grandfather, that whole question. She kind of needs that Housefather cover as well. I mean, I think she is definitively pro-Israel, but I think she has an added political element that she's considering in that. And uh, but yeah, so great action. I just to go through a little bit, just in this in response to this, I went back and I looked at the Freeland, some of the Freeland stuff. I wrote a piece about this disruption. People can see on my website, and a bit of Freeland's, position on Palestine or whatever. Um, but I went back to this 2018 speech, and I don't think I'd ever read the full speech. I just read some reports of it, so I read the full speech, and this is a speech where she said that Canada would act as an asset for Israel if it won a seat on the Security Council back in 2018 when we were going for a Security Council bid. And that was, and it also, she also said in that speech, Canada's commitment, and I knew this, Canada's commitment to Israel's security is unwavering and ironclad. Okay. But one of the other things in this speech that I hadn't seen, or maybe I read it and I just missed it or whatever. She says that, quote, the world also needs more Israel. So she's saying the world needs more Israel, which is just like, why would a Canadian like what like I mean, obviously it's not true, but why why would why would a Canadian politician say like the world needs more US, the world needs more Mexico, the world? I mean, it's just like it's bad enough when they say the world needs more Canada, right? That's bad enough. That whole like business, but just so over the top deferential sycophantic if you like. Um, but so it's great on them for this disruption. Now, the liberal leadership race, I think, offers some opportunities. Um, it offers some opportunities. This obviously this disruption is a clear example of grassroots movement intervening in a very successful way. But there's going to be lots of other opportunities. They're all going to be out there running around, doing public events. So lots of opportunities there. Um, in that sense, also, I think the the liberal they all know that the liberal voters would tend to be uh, better on this issue, or actually substantial better on this issue than the media. So, they're going to be playing to the votes. Freeland's in a bind. She can't really move. She's too staked out on the pro-Israel position, right? She can't move. What is going to be interesting here is Mark Carney. I think he's going to be interesting in that he's not part of the government, so he's a bit more room to maneuver and say that he believed one thing or didn't, whatever, right? Um, so I think there's a decent chance pressure on him could lead to decent comments from him. They're just comments, of course. They're not. I don't believe that if he becomes prime minister, that policy is going to significantly change. Nonetheless, getting some good comments or much better comments from Carney in the next couple of months is valuable. Derailing Freeland, if there can be perceived that anti-genocide forces help derail Freeland's uh, bid for to be prime minister, that means something. That is an assertion of power that the international solidarity movement, just generally anti-war, anti-NATO, peace, whatever you want to, any of those forces, we don't very rarely are we able to do that. So, and also obviously for Palestine, specifically Palestine, it would be an assertion of power that matters. I think just, defeating an MP because of Palestine, and I think that what happened in Verdun in Montreal, the Palestine did play a role. I think the activism did insert itself into the discussion and played a role in the liberal losing. I think that's a bit complicated, but so if there could be any sense that we activists targeting Freeland made it basically just, undercut her campaign because of Palestine. That would be quite important. I'm going to leave it at that and open it up to comments and questions and make Laura a co-host. Uh,
Hey, Eve.
Go ahead, Yuri.
Hey, Eve. Yeah, no, Chrystia Freeland. I think I haven't watched the entire thing, but I think if memory if I heard from fellow activists and so forth, she was interrupted a whopping 5 times, and it was without a doubt an absolute fiasco in terms of her launch and so forth. And I do have to say this, and part of my language, but the look on Anthony Housefather's face, that douchebag, was priceless. Was absolutely priceless. Now, speaking of other douchebags who we need to wipe smirks off their face, uh, this is probably going to be a big controversial or controversial, depending on your point of view. Wab Kinew, the premier of Manitoba, considered left leaning. He is the leader of the NDP there. Uh, I don't know what to say, but I just find it so shocking that somebody with his background, with his work at Al Jazeera, a guy who I have his documentary series on, indigenous and settler relations, how that guy can defend Israel, say Israel has the right to defend itself, saying from the river to the sea is anti-Semitic, and then thinks that he can invite just two Palestinian children and thinks that he should get a pat on his back for that. I just find absolutely disgusting. Uh, but are people too afraid to attack him or any indigenous politicians who are supportive of Israel because they feel that this is already a marginalized group enough that you can't, that indigenous politicians should get a pass on this? I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was actually going to talk. I had in my notes, I had mentioned, I had the canoe thing, Rob Canoe thing. What John Ralston saw, oh yeah, so John Ralston saw, the prominent philosopher who's, sort of leftish, whatever, said this is what Canadian leadership sounds like. So canoes, it totally worked, right? Like he's preparing. Somebody posted how he's preparing to, be the leader of the NDP national, and this little gimmick with two Palestinians getting health care, it worked. It was perfect for him because the really extreme kind of stupid Zionists all have a panic. Oh, all our money, all our, right? All these the far right crowd goes, we're just giving all the money to the terrorist kids from Gaza, whatever kind of. That's all over social media. And then this sort of like liberalish whatever crowd. I mean, Trudeau did that when that was with the doctor I mentioned, the Gaza doctor, right? He did that whole initiative of bringing kids from Gaza, and that Trudeau agreed. That was one of his big like pro-Palestinian things before being elected, and I think he ended up like not even coming through with that or something. That's part of how that Gaza doctor, I Shall Not Hate, I believe is the guy's book, and he did it. He did with Heather Reisman. He did speaking events. Actually, I interrupted Heather, disrupted Heather Reisman at the that's like 15 years ago, 12 years ago or something. Anyways, but with him. But yeah, I mean, I think this stuff works, right? It works. It gets the media. There's a kind of liberal world, and they just ignore all his like Zionist. That this is it. It plays. There's a specific Israel element to it, and then there's the broader element, right, which is charity and this kind of stuff. Like, the you open the door to Syrian immigrants, or refugees, should I say? And you just ignore the policies that you may have pursued that led to the refugees, right? That's an element of our nationalistic, imperialistic political culture that is just overwhelming. And so this kind of thing plays into that, and people like John Ralston Saul go along with it. So I think, politically, Wab Kinew is probably, as sort of, uh, as kind of hard, odious as it may seem to us, he's probably playing a smart game, for somebody who's got ambitions to certainly as premier of Manitoba, but maybe also ambitions to be the head the NDP and be the next kind of Jagmeet kind of positioning.
Okay, Catherine, go ahead. Can you unmute, please?
Hi, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Hi. Thanks so much, Eve. That was a great talk, and the continuation with Yuri too. Um, I I, I just want to say something about last week. You had a great rant about the discourse around Palestine, Israel, and even among left-wing people. Um, but I want to defend Elle a little bit because I think, as far as I'm concerned, she's really solid, and I've learned so much from her about the whole incarceration system, and I've through this genocide, I've seen her at events, and she's right in there. We sat outside in the freezing cold and listened to her do a teach-in about campus activism, and anyway, I don't know what it was. You said she wouldn't say something about, wouldn't admit there was Jewish supremacy. I'd like to know what where that interview was, or what the actual comments she made were. And
Yeah, it's a few months ago. It's a breach interview. She's having she's doing a discussion with Martin Lukesh. I can't remember the exact. It's a couple months ago. I can't remember the specifics. I messaged her about it. I had a back and forth with her about it privately. I mentioned it at 2 months ago or something like that on one of these talks. And I totally agree. I mean, I that's why I was stunned by it, because Elle is great, and she's not just great like on a whole bunch of issues. She's been very good on Palestine, but it was pretty stark. It was basically trying to do everything to say there is like sort of Jewish Zionism, that sort of doesn't matter. And but then what was really stark about it, and I pointed this out to her in the exchange, was that but then she goes out her way to like celebrate Jewish activists opposing genocide, right? So I don't want to talk about the Jewish organizations that are enabling genocide, but I'm like really keen to be like, and these great, Jews say no to genocide and IJV or whatever, right? Like it's stark, and I don't know, we have to call people out, and I know why she's doing it. I get why she's doing it, right? Like there's a political climate that you get labeled anti-Semitic if you it's dangerous, but so I'm getting hassled by the 7-year-old. But yeah, John, but same thing goes with John Clark. John Clark's not just great like on all kinds of things, and been active, I think, 50 years, or OCAP, I don't know his whole trajectory, right? But he for decades and decades, he's great on Palestine too. He's been very good on Palestine. But like I also think, I mean, as I detail, you can read the article where I get into it all more in sort of detail. He's making a concession that's not a concession that we need to be making. We shouldn't be. It's and not don't need to be making. It's appalling that we're making these concessions 16 months into this these horrors in Gaza. It was, quite frankly, I mean, I like this isn't new to me, in that I've seen this whole play out over many decades, and I've been through had these all these groups saying don't have anything to do with Eve. This goes back 8, 10 years. Oh, Eve went on and did an interview there and brought up things that you're just not supposed to talk about. Whatever. This is all like so I've seen it all, and it's been appalling to me now for many, many years how boxed in this discussion is, how fearful people are, how I guess if you want to put it in a certain language, how centering of Jewish feelings they are or Jewish perceptions they are. Um, so I've seen that all, but at some point, like there has to be some threshold of like what happens to Palestinians and our willingness to like keep going along with this, right? So so yeah, and I don't. It's not. I mean, it's not. L is great. L is great on Palestine. We've done very good stuff on Palestine. But let's also not be. Let's not avoid making clear criticisms where there are clear criticisms to be made. And the reality is that as I point out in the piece about John Clark, responding to John Clark's thing, Jewish supremacism is a bigger problem on the left than anti-Semitism is, right? That's that, and the one simple way of trying to assess that, or how many times over 16 months of a Holocaust to enforce Jewish supremacy. That's the essence of what's going on in Gaza. The essence is, from a Zionist perspective, you want, the old maxim, as much Arab land with as few Arabs as possible, right? Drive them out. You want to still for Jews to have special rights. That's the point. That's the point of Zionism. And clearly, what they're doing in Gaza. And so, how many people have, over the last 16 months, have used the term anti-Semitism more than they've used the term Jewish supremacy? Unfortunately, you would find, if you would go through lefty pro-Palestinian people, you'll find that probably basically everyone has used the word anti-Semitism more than used the word Jewish supremacy over these past 16 months. That's a pretty remarkable comment. And I completely understand why people don't want to use the word Jewish supremacy. Oh, it's associated with the neo-Nazis. Oh, da 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 da. There's all kinds of you can make good arguments to avoid, using the words, right? Like I mean, I should put a bit of context in the L thing as well, because I know who she's talking to, Martin Lukash, right? Martin Lukash, I should say, the Breach they have stated officially they won't publish anything that I write on any issue because there's people who say I'm anti-Semitic. Okay, so that's a position that Martin Lukash has made. I've known Martin for 20 years. I've had many discussions and arguments with him. I actually helped him get his book published. Anyway, get into all this stuff. But I've been like, Martin was somebody not long ago was saying that Zionism was not about Jewish supremacy, it was about white supremacy. But Martin, can I go to Israel tomorrow? I cannot go to Israel tomorrow. Martin, can you go to Israel tomorrow? You can go to Israel tomorrow and become a citizen. Why? Why can't you? Why can't I go and why can you go? Like, it's just so self-evident, but we want to avoid getting into this discussion. So this is part of a background. There's all this context here, and I think that like much of the left, most of the left, radical pro-Palestinian left, is still avoiding using a term like Jewish supremacy, but they will use the term anti-Semitism. How long can that go on for? I don't know. But I think it's damaging.
I think we can let you go, Eve. I think your
Okay.
child wants you.
Yes. Okay. Take care, everyone. See you.
Bye.